Good morning. My name is Councillor Emma Parker and I'm Chairman for the Licensing Committee of Dorset Council, and I welcome you to our virtual hearing this morning. If I could get my two fellow councillors to introduce themselves, please.
Hello, I'm Carol. Oh, sorry, Sue, do you want to go first? Go first. No, you. Sue, go.
I'm Councillor Susan Cockin. I represent Portland Ward and also obviously Dorset Council.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Carol Jones. I represent Sturminster Newton and of course Dorset Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Just before we go any further, I will just go over some housekeeping. This is a public meeting and it will be streamed live on YouTube. Can you please keep background noise to a minimum if possible, and obviously can you mute your microphones and turn your cameras off when you are not speaking. Those of you that have made representation to speak, you will get your chance to speak. The only three people that will stay on the camera will be the three councillors. Also, there is a chat bar. The chat bar is purely there if you have any technical difficulties. It's not there for comments during the meeting, as it's not monitored by us as councillors, but it will be monitored by Democratic Services. I believe that's pretty much everything on that part. So I'll do some introductions now. I've introduced you all to the councillors. So now I would ask if we could have the Democratic Service Officer to introduce themselves, please.
Morning, I'm Elaine Tibble and I'm Senior Democratic Services Officer.
Thanks, Elaine.
Good morning, I'm George Dare and I'm a Democratic Services Officer.
Thanks, George. And then if I could ask our legal representative.
Good morning, I'm Lara Altry and I'm a solicitor with Dorset Council.
Thank you, Lara. And then the report author, that's our licensing team leader.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Aileen Powell, and as you say, I'm a licensing team leader and the report author. We do have one other licensing officer on the call, but he is just there for technical to do the streaming.
Okay, thank you very much. And now I will ask all parties to introduce themselves. If I can start with the applicant, have we got Mr. Andrew Dean with us?
Yeah, good morning. My name's Andrew Dean. I'm the applicant and the licensee at the Dolphin pub in Gillingham.
Thank you very much. And we've got one representation today, and that's Mr. Ball. Mr. Ball, are you there?
Yeah, so just to confirm, it's myself and Heather Woodburn as well, so not just from myself. So we both have the property next door to the applicant's property.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I just would like to make sure that councillors, do we have any declarations of interest?
No.
For this?
Councillor Parker, could I just confirm that are we recording this? Because it doesn't seem to be shown. It is being recorded because it doesn't show on my screen as a little red box being recorded, but I just wanted to confirm that it is.
Okay, yes.
Hello, sorry to interrupt us, it's Elaine here. Do we need to elect a chairman before we go?
We did that at the beginning. Did we?
No, we didn't do that
we
on the live.
No, we haven't. We haven't.
So
no.
Can we elect a chairman?
Emma, may I propose you, please?
You can.
I would second that.
Thank you. Thanks, councillor. Sorry, I completely forgot about that one. Do we have any apologies?
No, there's no apologies.
Okay. Do we have any urgent business?
No, Chair, no urgent business.
And do we have any exempt business?
No, Chair, no exempt business.
Thank you very much. So with that, I will pass over to our licensing team leader, Aileen. So Aileen could introduce the report for the Dolphin pub in Gillingham. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is an application to vary the licence by adding further garden areas and the car park of the premises to the area that's covered by the licence, and this is to enable an outside bar on the car park. The times of the licence will remain the same, and the conditions on the licence will remain the same, including the one that states the use of the outside areas for all activities shall cease at 2300 hours. There have been no representations from the responsible authorities. One resident, Mr. Ball, and his partner have objected to the variation on the grounds of public nuisance. In the response to this objection, Mr. Dean has stated that he fully intends to close the outside bar at 10 p.m. on any weekday night and 10:30 on a Friday and a Saturday night. Mr. Dean has stated in his application that it has been made very much with the pandemic in mind and the current requirements for customers to be socially distanced. For clarity, the requirement to provide table service and for customers to remain seated whilst they order, eat and pay remain the same in the current restrictions, whether it would be from the outside bar or the inside bar. Mr. Dean could increase his area for consumption of alcohol without the need for this variation, as the consumption of alcohol is not a licensable activity, and in any event he has on and off sales on his current licence. The variation is required due to the fact that currently alcohol cannot be sold or supplied from a bar in this area. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Aileen. Councillors, do you have any questions for Aileen or anything you need clarifying?
Not at this moment.
Okay, Mr. Dean, do you have any questions for Aileen?
Not at this moment, no.
Okay, and Mr. Ball, do you have any questions?
None at this current time, no.
Okay, thank you. So now I will ask the applicant, Mr. Dean.
Yes, I have prepared a statement that I'm quite happy to read from, if that's okay with everyone.
Yeah, yeah,
okay.
That's fine.
Okay. Firstly, thank you for taking the time to attend this hearing. Obviously, we would have liked for the application to have proceeded without the need for this step. I'm certain that you've read through my response to the representation, and I have no intention of repeating anything that I've already stated. The application was born out of the pandemic, with more and more people feeling the outside is a safer place to socialise. The Licensing Act is a permissive legislation where the authority must grant the licence unless there is evidence that one or more of the licensing objectives would be undermined. There is no evidence against this application, only allegations made by the sole representees. In fact, the local authority has not received a single complaint against the premises under our management, which clearly demonstrates our excellent track record in managing the premises and running the business. No responsible authority has raised any concerns regarding the licence, including environmental health, who are the experts and responsible for dealing with public nuisance on behalf of the authority. In fact, one of the local councillors, Roger Weeks, was so impressed with the way that we've innovated and adapted to the pandemic that he wrote to our local MP, Simon Hall, to inform them of the efforts demonstrating our good business management. I want to clarify one point, which is simply not true, and this is the accusation that we are doubling numbers or will be overrun with people in the garden. Where does this accusation even come from? We've increased the garden size by 128 square metres, spending thousands of pounds in doing so, to make it a space that attracts the type of clientele that we are looking for. As you can see by the representee's photographs, all this expansion has been away from the representee's property. In this space, we've only added 2 further tables. In other words, spacing out the tables that were there. The idea behind this is to space the tables out more to provide a much more pleasant environment for people to sit in and to expand the garden closer to the pub and away from the representee's property. The representee also refers to the bar doubling capacity. Again, this is simply not true. Inside the pub, we have 4 lager taps, 8 beer engines and 4 cider taps, 14 in total. 16 different wines, 16 different gins and around 25 different spirits. We do not offer shots of any description, which we feel attracts a different style of clientele than we are looking for. To put the converted horse box, which is what it is, into perspective, we aim to offer 1 lager and 1 cider on tap. This is using the new Draftmaster system, which avoids the use of cellar cooling equipment and large heavy barrels and cellar gas, which also means there'll be limited or no noise from its use. As you can see, there is no intention or design to double the capacity. I understand the concerns of the representee. Having a family home that backs onto the pub garden would not be my choice, whether it was busy or not when I bought the house. The best analogy that I can come up with is buying a house under a current flight path during the pandemic, when very few planes are flying, and then complaining to the airlines when they get busy again. The outside bar is something we can use for weddings, funerals, christenings, and continuing to support local and national charities, which we do on a regular basis with coffee mornings, along with walking groups that currently wish to be outside. We also hold a carol service in conjunction with the local church and schools during December. The idea of the bar would be allow us to sell mulled wine and mulled cider from this location, rather than having to turn people away when the pub is busy. We are trying to make the most of our business through innovation and expansion. something that Dorset Council are keen to promote in a time where many pubs are being forced to close. We also provide employment for local people. In summary, we can, of course, as you've already stated, carry on as we are, still serving the people in the garden from our main bar. We feel that a presence in the garden in the form of the horse box, converted to sell an exceedingly small range of drinks, is a benefit to the local community both now and in the future. The presence of a member of staff when this bar is open will also surely allow us more easily to meet the objectives of our licence. We will continue to work closely with our neighbours, as I said, many of whom are also our customers. In fact, we approached the representative before this meeting as we were concerned that his objections were not at all relating to the licence application. I want him and his family to enjoy their home and offered him to come up with a list of things that he would like us to look at to see if we could help with his issues that do not relate to the change of licence. This actually was whilst he was in our pub garden looking at the work that we carried out. He said he would speak to Heather, his partner, and come back to me. I heard nothing more from him. But also I would like to say thank you for supplying these photos. I wished I'd thought of that. They clearly show how much improvements we've made to the garden, from an unlit, uninviting garden that would only encourage problems to one that people would love to enjoy, the alfresco style of dining that we're trying to encourage. We are not trying to encourage large groups of people to drink more alcohol. Purely, the main objective for us is to create a dining space, which if you've seen the garden photos, you'll realise that's clear. It also clearly shows the efforts we've made to move the garden area away from the representee's property. It shows 2 of the new tables we've purchased and clearly shows that there were no vegetations. It was purely weeds near the south-facing rear of his property, only at the far end next to the carport where they park their car. It also shows only 3 tables near his fence. In 2019 and 2020, we had 8 tables along this same line of fence. The expansion to the garden has allowed us to relocate these tables further away. I'm not sure if I'm missing a point here, but I felt that once again, the representation is not about the amendment to the licence, but the size of the pub garden. Central government is clear that pubs and restaurants should be expanding their outside space, filling the car parks with benches to help keep people safe, taking advantage of the pavements and fast-tracking pavement licences. We've taken some of this on board, but only added 2 extra tables. We've tried to make the space one that encourages use in keeping with our image as a family-friendly pub. I really feel that the objections raised are more born from concerns with the pub being located next to their garden, which it has been since 1830. I therefore question when he bought the house, who advised him that the pub garden would remain the same with 2 benches, who advised that the pub would never change hands and the new owners make improvements, who advised that the pub garden would remain the same empty, uninviting space all the while he owned the property, who advised that the pub will never be any busier than it was at the time he bought his house, who advised that a global pandemic would make it essential for people to spend more time outside. I question how any sensible person could not realise that a house next to a quiet pub would never become a house next to a busy, vibrant pub enjoyed by the community that they themselves live in. I make no apologies for the sound of people enjoying themselves in the pub garden. Most of these people this weekend were actually over the age of 40 or families with young children, much like themselves. The garden area we've created is not the kind of space that we think appeals to the swearing, noisy individuals that they seem to think the pub will use. Or we use the pub, I apologise. The licence has no bearing on the number of tables we have in the garden. The change of licence we've asked for is simply to allow us to sell alcohol outside to reduce the number of people having to come inside, both now and in the future. The number of tables in the outside space will remain the same regardless of amending licence being granted or not. In fact, as already stated, we could fill the car park with tables. We have no intention of doing this. In summary, the granting of the licence has no impact on table numbers or garden size. It is merely to allow us to sell alcohol from a secondary location. There are no evidence-based negatives to granting the licence, no complaints against the premises, no representation from the responsible authorities. There is also no evidence that one or more of the licensing objectives would be undermined. That's no evidence. And I respectfully ask you to grant the licence as per the application. Thank you for allowing me to read that. I appreciate it. It took a long time to prepare.
Thank you, Mr. Dean. Appreciate your statement. Thank you for that. Councillors, do you have any questions for Mr. Dean?
I do.
Okay.
Mr. Dean, What I saw one of the concerns raised by Mr. Ball, who made the representation about the smoking, and he was requesting about banning smoking out in the garden, which you can't. It's a very a blanket statement. Would it be possible as a mitigating to perhaps the tables near the fence to ask customers not to smoke at those tables? Would that have an impact? Do you think that would be possible for you to do as a little bit of a, just perhaps those couple of tables? It would be only, I don't know how that would affect your business, whether you'd be able to do that, whether you'd be able to enforce it. It may put your staff in a difficult position, but I just wondering whether that would be a compromise that may mitigate one of the concerns that Mr. Ball has.
Yeah, I can answer that. The statement that I've read out, I've rewritten several times over the last couple of weeks, including at 2 o'clock in the morning, because this has been concerning me somewhat. I actually over the weekend experimented with having the tables, and I'm sat in the garden now. There are no ashtrays on any of those tables located near the fence. It's impossible, as you say, to ban people from smoking outside. It's their right, I think. I think that would go against their civil rights to do that. However, and again, it's very difficult to enforce. However, what we have done is made the tables where I'm sat, which are closer to the pub, the tables where the ashtrays are for people to smoke from, and there aren't any ashtrays located at the rear tables. And we do ask people when they come in whether they intend to smoke, and then we position them at tables where there are ashtrays. Also, from our point of view, there's nothing worse than hearing cigarette butts up. I've never ever smoked in my life, and I hate it. And I totally agree with the applicant. You know, if I was sat the other side of the fence, or I go out for something to eat, I try and avoid sitting next to someone smoking. That's not to say I've got anything against smoking, please don't get me wrong, but it's just something that I personally don't like. So we have already put that in place, and I think it was a great idea. Policing it, of course, is very difficult. It's not so bad now where you've got table service, but in the future where people are allowed to move about, then it may well be slightly more difficult. But again, if there is someone positioned at this bar outside, they're of course able to manage it a lot more effectively than we are from our bar, which is located some distance away from the garden.
Thank you, Mr. Dean. Before Councillor Cocking, for your next question, I've got a comment from Aileen Powell.
Thank you, Chair. Just for clarity, with the new pavement licences that have come in, there is actually a requirement for a portion of those to be dedicated to no smoking areas. So there is precedent for actually requiring a certain area of the outside to be non-smoking and designated as such.
Okay, as I say, we would be quite happy to do that, and we have trialled that this weekend with great success. Okay,
thank you. Councillor Cocking, would you have any further questions?
No, I don't. As a non-smoker myself, I totally appreciate. I don't particularly like sitting near people who smoke, but yeah. But no, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jones.
I did have a question, but actually the gentleman has answered it through his statement.
Yeah.
But I'm just wondering whether to assist Mr. Ball, whether perhaps if this works for him, that he would consider planting something along that fence, something that would grow fairly tall and perhaps screen the area at all. I'm just wondering if that was a possible consideration.
That fence, actually, as I put in my original statement, was replaced by the representative. I think it was around about October, perhaps earlier than that, September, October time of last year. And there was the opportunity then, if it was a genuine concern, to, instead of re-erecting a fence, for them to have placed plants along there. Realistically, we've only been here since April 19. We had an okay year, although we lost money in the first year. We've had a terrible year. We've spent the council money that you guys have very kindly provided in the form of grant. We've invested back into the pub. You know, we haven't used that to to pay ourselves any extra income or anything like that at all. And you can clearly see that by the photos, the efforts that we've made to make this a nice area. We haven't got the funds at this moment in time to plant hedging along the back of in our garden. If the applicant wishes to do that, you know, they are free to do that and to remove the fence and put hedging in there if they so will. I just haven't got the money at the moment. I'd love to.
I understand that.
Buy substantial plants to cover a 6-foot fence at this time.
No, I understand that. Can you just tell, sorry, I'm not terribly familiar. How far away would the bar be located from where the applicant's house is? Is it what sort of distance is there? Do you know approximately?
And pace it out. It's probably it's a horse box. It's not as if it's a serving area. It's not a place. There would be one member of staff inside it. There's no room for anyone else. There's one fridge. You know, it's very, very small. It's probably, I mean, I can pace it out. It's probably about 15 meters, I would have thought.
Okay. No, that's fine. Thank you very much. I'm happy. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. Mr. Dean, I just have one question. Again, a bit like Councillor Jones, you've pretty much covered all of my questions in your statement. Since you've obviously become the landlord of the pub, have you had anybody ever come directly to you with any concerns of the pub, with people leaving, people being noisy in the garden, or so forth?
We had one instance of a group of girls that were, I say girls, I think when the applicant visited me, he mentioned that the worst people in the garden, and I quote this, are middle-aged women that cackle very loudly at their new boyfriend's jokes, which aren't funny. And, you know, and it amused me, although I shouldn't admit that it amused me at the time, but it did make me laugh. And yes, you can't stop people laughing, and those people we asked to move on straight away. I had an instance that wasn't reported to me. I happened to be wandering down the garden from the bar collection party on a warm Sunday afternoon, and there was a lady and gentleman, and she swore, and I asked her to leave, and that's how we managed our pub. I mean, it's impossible to stop people swearing. You know, you hear it on the street, you hear it all the time. It's impossible to stop people laughing and joking. But I took offence to it because there were young children in the garden, and I asked her to leave. But that wasn't an instance where there was any complaint at all. So no, in short, no, we haven't really, genuinely.
Okay, thank you. Councillors, do you have any further questions for Mr. Dean?
No.
Okay, thank you. If I could ask, Aileen, do you have any questions for Mr. Dean?
No, I don't. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. We have no responsible parties. I'd like to ask Mr. Ball, do you have any questions for Mr. Dean on the statement that he's made?
Yeah, firstly, thanks again for your time, just condemn the statement which suggests that I'm not a sensible person for purchasing a house next to a pub. Just to remind Mr. Dean that he also purchased the pub next to our house, and we were already here. So that is obviously a risk that he has taken at the same time. But yeah, definitely just to condemn being said that I'm not a sensible person. There was also mention there of no complaints. We've had a couple of complaints into them, although direct. There is obviously comments around them not being formalised. That is fine. That was mainly due to our relationship with Nextdoor, that we felt we could deal with them between us as opposed to going via the formal routes. But I don't feel it necessarily represents the true picture, making statements around no formal complaints, because actually if we do need to start formalizing these, then we are more than happy to. In terms of questions, my main question ultimately would be is why, if the license you're going for, does it extend right up to the fence line effectively? So you've got the bar in position at the end of the car park, yet you're actually asking for a license to the end of the car park. So there's effectively an overreach on your requirements as to what you want to do here. So that's just something to note from ours as a question as to why the license application has been submitted to actually cover the entire garden area, not just the serving area.
Okay, Mr. Dean, would you like to reply to that question?
Yeah, I mean, I took advice because I'm not an expert. I had all the license forms through. I originally looked at this back in, I think it was April, May last year, and spoke to Catherine, and she advised me that my current license doesn't extend far enough for me to be able to sell alcohol in a second location that was far enough away from the pub to make it worthwhile, if that makes sense. Not worthwhile in the sense of financially, but from a footfall point of view of saving distance to serve people. And with the pandemic in place or happening early last year, it was evident that people were going to be wanting to spend more time outside. It was easier to draw a line around the plan of the car park than it was to try and measure out and estimate where the bar area would be located. That's all. The bar is in its position now, but it would be impossible to position that one bar effectively. And also, when we look, we have no intention of moving it any closer. And if you wanted to draw a line back across the new part of the garden, then that would be fine. I've got no issue with that at all. So in other words, where he's drawn on his plan, where the garden used to be and where the garden now is, sorry, the road's really noisy, where the garden used to be and where the garden now is, you could draw a line around there and make that the end of the license area. That wouldn't give me any concerns for consideration at all. It's a horse box. To call it mobile would be a bit of an insult, really. It can't go anywhere. It's been hemmed in so no one can steal it, which happens. So moving it would be an almost impossible task. So where it is now is where it will be, which is approximately 15 meters away from the property.
Okay.
But that's why it was just simply a matter of drawing a line on the plan of the pub was easier than trying to measure out exactly where we were going to put it and then falling foul of it not being within a certain amount of distance of where it should be.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Ball, does that go some way to answer your question?
Yeah, so it does answer your question on that point. I think my next question would be, given that somebody was in the serving rather, as you can only serve outside, so there was always somebody in the garden over the weekend. As to how it could be explained as to the smoke coming into our house over the weekend then and the noise issues that we again had. So we effectively did not follow up further with Mr. Dean and his partner after the informal discussions, which were actually started by Mr. Dean when he came around to our property during the day. And yes, I did go and have a look at the garden, but I don't think there's anything in that. And it was obviously, we were going to apply if it was applicable. But if there was somebody in the garden all weekend, then how do we still have the noise problems? Because these are still going to be the same people that are going to be serving from this bar in the garden. What they are obviously deeming as acceptable noise, and yes, there's acceptable noise if you're sat in the garden all day long, but noise is different when you're subjected to it from 12 o'clock lunchtime all the way through until possibly up to 11 o'clock at night, and on occasions, and there have been a complaint made about this, at a later time than 11 o'clock. It's very, very different. So yeah, we saw somebody smoking actually on I think it was Sunday this weekend. We had to remove our washing out of the garden. So that was, I ask as to what is going to change with this member of staff, and why do you need the license to sell alcohol to be able to manage the smoke and the noise from the garden?
Thank you, Mr. Bull. Mr. Dean, would you like to reply to the question?
Yeah, I don't think there's any real way of resolving this, to be honest with you, from a noise point of view, because the garden is busy. There are 8 extra people potentially in here than there have been over the last couple of years. The fact that there was no swearing or shouting or anything like that. It was the normal hubbub that you would get from a pub garden, and it would be impossible, I'm afraid, whether there was someone out here or not, to prevent people from laughing and joking and enjoying themselves. And in fact, the majority of the noise that I noticed came from two children that were playing near the fence, and they were running behind the flower border that we've got, which is the triangular border that you can see, that I asked them not to, because there was some fertilizer and that in there to help plants grow that Plant World had supplied. And the noise from them was far greater than anyone else, and it just didn't, to me, seem right to be asking children to be quieter. I don't see how that's possible. I also think with the smoking issue, again, you know, we weren't out here permanently. There was my wife and I running back and forth from the pub. There was no one out here on a permanent basis, which there would be if the bar was open. And I just feel whether the license is granted or not, these issues of noise where the applicants are now both working from home, where they've got a young daughter, I cannot see how moving forward the noise of a general hubbub of a pub garden is going to change, I'm afraid. Okay. There was no instances of any loud swearing or any of the unruly behaviour that perhaps we don't really attract anyway. But so I can't answer that, because I just don't see that that's possible to prevent that. And the smell of smoke will very much depend on the wind direction. I can guarantee to you that nobody was sat at those tables smoking, because there are no ashtrays on those tables for anyone to be smoking at. So that I can't really answer that any better than that, I'm afraid.
Okay, well, thank you for your response. Mr. Bull, do you have any more questions?
Yeah, just a comment on a couple of items there. So
if we could if we can just stick to direct questions to Mr. Dean at the moment, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to you in a minute for you to have to make your representation as well. So if you've just got any direct questions for Mr. Dean.
I don't think
it can be difficult because it is questions as opposed to sort of statements.
Okay, yeah, I'm fine with that now.
Obviously, you will have the opportunity to ask more questions as we go on, should they come to you.
Can I just make one point, if that's okay?
Okay.
We want to work with Mr. Ball and his partner. We really do. You know, we're a family. We're trying to make this business work. We want our neighbours to be happy. I can't be any clearer than that. And we have other neighbours that also directly back onto our garden, of which no representation has been made. They accept the level of noise that comes with living next to a pub, just as I accept the level of noise that comes from living on an empty road, on a busy road. We can't have our windows open at night because the road noise is too busy, particularly with the increase of lorries. I think the noise issue is, I can't get people to sit in the garden and not make any noise. It's impossible. And as much as I would love to help, and I really, truly would, I do have a business to run as well. And I want to continue to be able to live here, work here, and bring the pub back to a vibrant, busy pub. But that comes with noise, I'm afraid. But I would like to work closely with them to help as much as I possibly can.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Ball, if we could come to you now, and if you would like to, give us some. I mean, this is, I can see this is quite a difficult one, and I fully appreciate both sides. But if you could just, give us a bit more background of how it's been, for you.
Yeah, so it's myself here and my partner Heather.
Yeah, that's fine.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry that I'm actually not that vocal on this call. I'm currently looking after the baby, but I am listening in and feeding into Alistair, so it is definitely a joint call for us both, but I do apologise.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. But yeah, we'd just like, you know, to hear your side, you know, your concerns.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So can I just first of all just make a few comments on obviously the last couple of statements, given your point there. So there were a couple of statements there specifically around being impossible to control noise. Okay, so we've been told that they're not able to do it effectively. So how kind of with this new license, everything here is encouraging. Okay, so the garden has been lit now fully. So there are lights around the entire garden. There was comments back initially to our initial representation saying that there were no additional lights. There are additional lights, and there are some that are pointing at our property. That is fact. So the lit garden encourages people to stay in the garden later. I completely understand that there are secondary elements to that, reduction of crime, etc., not having a dark garden with corners and having it lit, but it does serve to encourage people to use the garden later. So you've got more people in there later. You've then increased the size of the garden. And as you can see from my previous aerial shots when we actually moved into the property, I think actually this was on one of our early viewings, there was a vegetation border along the entire fence. It existed. It's not so, it wasn't cut down by Mr. Dean. It was actually cut down in the weeks before he took over the pub by the previous owner. So it doesn't mean that we're not saying that he did it, but there was a degree of separation. There was additional barrier there. Completely agree. Yes, we did indeed move the fence, or sorry, put the fence in for them. And that was kind of a joint thing. You know what, where the brambles had, yes, at some points attacked the fence, it needed replacing. It kept on falling over. So we had to make a decision that for the safety of our garden, actually protect it ultimately from the pub garden and people coming in, etc. We had to fix the fence where the panels kept on blowing out. We don't, as you can probably see from hopefully the images that were shared with you yesterday, have the ability to put anything else in our garden. So we have a small retaining wall and that fence only. So anything else that has to go in there to try and reduce noise transfer, etc., would have to be done on pub size, and it was there previously. But as I said, it was removed at one stage. And then the additional vegetation, as shown by the photos that provided from the Facebook page, was then removed. So there was a portion removed over 2 fence panels, and then it was removed in its entirety, and obviously not replanted. So we've gone from having 2 benches, yes. We now are up to 12. I don't think it can be denied that at all that there is going to be an uplift in noise from that. We've gone from possibly having maybe 4 or 5 people on these small benches to probably 30, 40 plus people in the garden. That can have and does have a profound impact on us here. I think a point was made by Mr. Dean that things have changed now that we're both working from home. And I'd just like to point out that Heather has always worked from home. And actually the issues aren't so much during working time, because majority of people are actually working themselves. So the garden usage itself is acceptable, shall we say, during the day. But it's obviously when you finish work and you want to relax that it is not. Now, I do appreciate him making comment about the children at the weekend. Yes, that was a problem. It was getting later towards the evening. Our daughter had already gone to bed. And then you've got kids running around. And he said he didn't want to approach kids and ask them to be quiet. So what is going to change in approaching an adult? He said that, yes, he's thrown some people out for swearing. But how often does that happen? Every time somebody swears, it's not going to happen. I think these are kind of examples brought up to kind of make it look like there is going to be more oversight with this license than perhaps without it. And I don't think in any respect that is correct. Now, I'll kind of make the point that, yes, we are not happy with the 11 o'clock closing time as it is and as it stands. And I make the point that it was over 11 o'clock last year at points. So how can we at all support a further license, which is only going to create more business? Now, we need to be clear here. Mr. Dean made points about it being a horse box. It is a bar, okay? If you go from having one bar inside to having a second bar outside, you have doubled your bar capacity. You have 2 bars. And to make the point in the representation, this is apparently about not making people walk in and out. And at the beginning, Mr. Dean listed as to how many different types of alcohol we had inside and then how many he's going to have outside. But if then the person doesn't want the 1 or 2 outside, then they're still going to go inside anyway. So I don't think it's really required to have this. He's made the point that he can do what he wishes to the entire car park area, and actually possibly if he put benches along the entire car park area, he may have attracted representations from the house that borders. But apart from one other house who hasn't had a representation on this, but was obviously approached prior to this happening because the fence was replaced between them, and I presume that a discussion happened at that point, there are no other land bordered properties with this. And we are the one with the single biggest border who suffers from this. So, and I've made the point to Mr. Dean when I spoke to him informally the other day, that we had problems last year. We cannot open our windows at night, okay? So one of them being our daughter's bedroom, who at 6 months old last year had a room that was between 26 and 28 degrees, okay? Which for the protection of a child is dangerous, okay? So we were having to move her out of her actual bedroom because we were unable to open the windows because of noise, etc., from the garden next door. And that's not going to change this year. So last year, that was with the rule of 6 in place. Okay. This year, we are looking to open up more and more. And people are going to go outside again quicker. Or it's going to get busier, so to speak. There's an encouragement for the business. Obviously, I can completely understand he has ploughed thousands of pounds into this, but he wouldn't do that unless there was going to be a return on it. Now, his return on that is going to be having more people in the garden for a longer period of time. And as I explained to him the other day, that actually having people in there from 12 at lunchtime, even at 50% capacity, if you'd say 12 at lunchtime through to 11 o'clock at night, actually at points is worse than having 100% capacity between 6 and 8 at night and it's stopping at 8. But the main problem is here, we finish work, you want to relax in your house. Even with your windows and doors shut, you can hear the noise over the top of your TV when you're trying to relax in your property next door, okay? We didn't have those problems the previous years when we were actually in here before we took over the pub. And yes, there were 2 benches in there and the garden was probably underused, shall we say. But obviously, if he's going to fit out the garden and make it so there are, well, it's 6 times the capacity in there effectively with benches currently, and that's only because people can be seated only. In the summer, people can stand in there. So you're going to get more mixture, you're going to get greater sound, etc., coming out of there. It's going to make it a real challenge for us here. So we were fair to them last year, and let's be clear here. We understand that as a business, they were severely impacted by COVID, okay? So last year, we effectively and for our goodwill, cut them some slack when there were issues within the pub garden, okay, which we ultimately, and off the basis of some of the comments on here, should have formalised, but we didn't want to be the people who email the licensing team every time there is an occurrence. I don't want to have environmental health sat around here in my garden trying to catch the smoke and seeing how bad it is. I don't want environmental health having to be around here with the noise. But unfortunately, it sounds like we are heading that way. I just fail to see how we can say that noise, and I think it's quite clear from the old versus new garden image that I showed from the area. When you look at it, it's almost triple the actual usable area within the pub now versus what it was. And obviously that is going to be used more and more with the bar facility outside.
Thank you, Mr. Ball. Councillors, do you have any questions for Mr. Ball? Councillor Jones, you're muted.
Beg your pardon. I was
Yeah,
worried about the dog.
Do you have any questions for Mr. Ball?
I'm just looking to see whether I can see any possible compromise, and unfortunately, I think with the level of worry that he has with everything that's happened last year with no outside bar, I don't honestly think I can see a compromise there unless he can tell me otherwise.
Yeah, and to be fair, ultimately, I don't think there is, and certainly not with the amount of people we're now ending up with there. Certainly over the weekend, as I said, we had smoke and we had noise over the weekend. And we wanted to give an opportunity to, and this is one of the challenges with doing this here in obviously April, is the problems aren't so much now, okay? So I would love to give you a recording of a June or July summer night, okay, at 9:30 at night or 10:30 at night, etc., and people are there, but I can't. So I think obviously, yes, we had issues over the weekend. That's April. It was the first weekend of stuff being back open, but it gives us a taste effectively of what we are going to have now for the entire summer. And certainly to note that the idea of a bar was floated to me by Mr. Dean last year, okay, as something that was being explored this year, okay. And that would suggest to me it has nothing to do with COVID, okay. And I completely understand their requirement to serve people in a way currently, but they're able to do that right now under the current licensing, okay. So ultimately, if this bar goes in, we feel that it is going to add to effectively encourage people to spend more time in the garden for longer. The garden is now lit to enable that, so effectively people can sit out there till 11 at night, currently under current licensing conditions, unless there was an agreement on time. But even the suggested times that Mr. Dean has said at 10 and 10:30, it's actually after. We're talking 8, 9 o'clock at night when you're actually trying to sit down and relax. You finished your day. You're trying to spend your relaxation time in your own home. That the problems are there. So I don't really think there's going to be much compromise around time. the latest stuff we would ideally like is 9 o'clock, and then you can actually go, great, okay, now I can relax. But at the moment, you're at the point where, certainly with the the heat situation in the house, certainly within the summer months, you're having to stay up until 11 o'clock. And I can't really describe the stress and anxiety of having to sit downstairs on your sofa at 11 o'clock at night with your partner who's gone to bed at 10 because she's tired, okay? And you wanted to go to bed at 10, but you also need to open up the windows upstairs so you can put your daughter in her room to go to sleep so it's cool enough in there for her. And you've got to wait, and then it's actually somebody's still in the garden at 11:05, and you're just you're just constantly on edge. We don't want to live on edge here, waiting all of the time for the pub. And I think if it's 10 o'clock, it's still going to be too late for us because the idea of having a bar means that they're going to want to serve those people enough in the garden until 10. With the previous arrangements, ultimately, let's be fair, people got bored of traipsing backwards and forwards to the pub. It got a bit cooler, the garden was darker, so they went inside or they went home. And actually, you kind of reduced the amount of people that were in the garden almost naturally. But now there is going to be a bar in the garden. People are actively being encouraged to sit, be served, and stay in the garden up until the end of the licensing.
Thank you, Mr. Ball. Councillors, do you have any other questions for Mr. Ball?
Mr. Ball, I just wanted to ask a question.
So that again, Councillor Cocking, you broke
Sorry,
up.
I didn't ask Mr. Ball, but it might a question for Mr. Dean.
Okay, we'll come back to that one in a bit if you don't mind. Mr. Ball, do you with the issues of the noise and the smoke and so forth outside, is this something that that happens sort of during the week in the evenings as well, or is it just potentially weekends that there's the real issue there for you?
So I'd say it happens. So smoke is almost a constant issue the moment somebody is smoking in a garden, because chances are they're going to be sat on one of the benches that's closest to us, or there will be a movement of it. So that's the majority of the time. To be clear, and this is trying to cast the mind back a year, because obviously they've only been open for 4 days this year. I think you can be realistic that Thursday, Friday and Saturday are probably the most popular of evenings. And I know those are the times actually that Mr. Dean wants to stay open the longest. So actually the most troublesome times are the ones that he wants to stay open the longest for, because that's when he's got the most custom. So I can understand from a business point of view, and let's be clear, and I hope I was clear with being honest, this isn't a personal thing. Ultimately, he is here to protect his business and try and so I'm here to protect effectively what is my assets, my house, but also my family and their well-being here certainly. I think just to make a point as well, last year we did actually replace our front door because we were having smoke coming through that, where it was almost effectively being pulled through the front door. So we replaced it, had new seals, etc. put in, but ultimately haven't really been able to test that because the pub has been shut effectively to see if that makes there. But it still doesn't alleviate the point that we can't have any back of our house doors or windows, which are our living area or our bedrooms, open without having smoke or actually noise. Obviously, it's obvious if you open up the doors, you're going to get more noise.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can kind of if you're going to sacrifice that, but you can't really accept smoke coming into the house.
No.
That's deemed very unacceptable for us, and certainly with a 16-month-old child who is now going to want to be playing in the garden. We have a garden. If we didn't want a garden, we would have bought a flat on a couple of floors up. But actually, for her to go and play safely without taking in passive smoke all the time from the pub garden next door, a weekend, for example, you're going to have to take her to a park or keep her inside. That's a real challenge. It's something to have to accept, that we've got a garden that we can use, and it's our garden to go and use, but we can't use it without being frustrated over by noise, the conversation, and a complete. People, when they've had a few drinks, they become looser with their language and their conversation. And unfortunately, having sat in the bench in our garden, having a barbecue with I think it was my mother last summer who was bubbled with us, the language coming out of there was utterly disgusting, and the conversation right next to a fence, considering there's a child in here, is quite difficult for us. And I think just one thing to note for us is the pub actually has land that is separated from any houses, okay? But the pub itself has chosen to make that land its private garden and push effectively what is the noise and smoke problem further away from their property and their effectively oversight. So they've admitted they don't have oversight of the garden. They've admitted that it's impossible to control noise. So they've just chucked it next to our house effectively and made it our problem to deal with. And then there's additional, obviously, licensing, etc., going on top of that, which is making it more and more and more and more of a problem. I kind of failed to see as to why, if these challenges were kind of known to them and they knew that this could happen, effectively somebody put representation ahead, why there was no choice to actually bring the garden closer to the pub, where there is a private garden area that the pub chooses to use as their own private garden, and why it's been pushed up towards us, effectively.
Okay, thank you. Councillors, do you have any further questions for Mr. Ball?
No.
Okay, thank you. Aileen, do you have any questions for Mr. Ball?
No, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And Mr. Dean, do you have any questions for Mr. Ball? And can I stress that they are questions and not comments or statements? I will give you both the chance to sum up at the end of the meeting.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I don't have questions, but I have answers to some of the questions and some of the points that Mr. Ball has raised.
Okay, Mr. Ball, are you happy for Mr. Dean to make comments on the points that you've mentioned?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, okay. Mr. Dean?
First of all, I didn't say that it was impossible to manage noise. What I said was it's you can't manage people's conversation, or you can't manage the general hubbub that comes from a pub garden. The size of the garden he mentioned again, as I've stated, has increased, but we have, when he talks about capacity, capacity is the amount of people that can realistically sit down. We've added 8 seats to the garden, so we haven't doubled the capacity. If we look at how the garden was, it very much depends on when you take that snapshot. Because if you go back to 15 years ago, and if any of you are local then, there was a couple here, he was called Rob, I can't remember her name, and we keep being told how good the pub was then and how busy it was, and particularly how busy the garden was. And at that time they had dining frames, they had French balls outside, the pub garden was similar size to what it is now. So it very much depends on when you take that snapshot as to what size the garden was. We again had very hot winds, particularly hot summer last year. It was impossible to have the windows open due to road noise. Something that he mentioned about the vegetation, it was full of brambles. I mean, it wasn't, it makes it sound like it was some kind of hedging that was here originally. I visited the pub prior to the purchase of our landlord on several occasions throughout the previous summer, so 2018. And he's correct, the garden wasn't used then, but it wasn't a nice hedge or anything like that at all. It was an unkept, an unloved space. Something else that was mentioned was staying open with the lighting and so on and so forth. If we're agreeing to close an hour earlier than what we are at the moment, whether we're staying open or not is irrelevant. We have no intention of staying open longer. This space out here has been designed really to promote more al fresco dining, cocktails on the terrace, those sorts of things, tapas and things like that. That's really what we're aiming for. He also mentioned the fact that this wasn't born out of the pandemic, and we'd approached him regarding the suggestion of a bar. We did, and that was at the time when the fence was put in, which was late summer. And the first time I mentioned it to Catherine was round about May time of last year. So the pandemic was already happening, and it was obvious that when pubs reopened, that they were going to be opening mainly outside. So it was very much born out of the pandemic. But we're not trying to fill the garden with people. There's so many sort of people that you can realistically serve, and those numbers don't change. The idea of the bar is to allow people to have a selection of drinks out here. He's right in what he's saying. We can't double the capacity of the bar. People are still going to have to come inside, or we're going to have to serve people from inside. I accept that, but it also gives us a presence in the garden. And talks about stress as well. Yeah, I agree. You know, this whole process has been very for us. It hasn't
sorry,
been comfortable
Mr.
running a pub for about 2 years.
Sorry, Mr. Dean, you dropped out there. We couldn't actually hear you.
Trying to make the most out of it. Yes. Right.
Mr. Dean.
Chairman, it's Elaine here. I think we've lost internet.
Yeah, I said, you know, it's been particularly stressful for us. I alluded to that I've been writing this at 2 o'clock in the morning. It's because I've been unable to.
I think Mr. Dean's potentially lost his internet connection. Or
yeah, sorry, I can hear everybody clearly.
Yes, yeah. Okay, I will wait a couple of minutes if that's okay, just to see if Mr. Dean does come back in and join us. Elaine, is it still showing that Mr. Dean's in the meeting, or has he left?
Yeah, I'm just having a look because I think there was I've got a message here from Roy that there was a site connection as well, internet connection for him. Mr. Dean, it still says that Mr. Dean is here. Yeah, he's still listed down the side, but I'm just having a look to see if I've lost Mr. Ball.
No, so I'm seeing. I can see
you're there.
Dean's got.
Sorry, yeah, oh yes, you are.
Yeah, I was going to say I've had no issue. I've been able to hear everything that's been said. It was only
he was outside, so he may have wandered just a little bit too far.
Yeah, I was going to say it was only those last couple of minutes that he dropped out. Nobody else has dropped out.
It's Councillor Coffin. I dropped out for a little while. I'm back on now. I can't see anyone, but I can hear everyone.
Oh, I think he's coming back in.
Oh yeah, here he is. And can I just check with Roy? We're okay now from your perspective, are we?
Hello.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Dean.
Hello. Sorry about that. My internet is so bad in
yeah, I don't think you were the only one. I do believe that I think everybody had a bit of a technical glitch at that point. We just got to a section where we couldn't quite hear you fully. But was there anything else that you wanted to comment on from Mr. Ball?
I'm not quite sure what parts you heard. Yes, the rear garden and our garden is a point in contention by the sounds of things. The rear garden to our pub, to the where the private garden is, has always been the private garden, although it was smaller actually, because as I stated before, when Rob had it, they used part of that garden for the beer garden, so the beer garden was even larger then. You can't access the garden other than through a private side gate, which is where the chef comes in and out of, and via the kitchen. So it is not possible to access that private garden from the pub. You have to come out through the kitchen, which obviously is not possible, and out by the rear kitchen door, which is how you access that part of the garden. So it isn't possible to do that. You know, the pub garden ideally would be located at the front of the pub, but it never has been, and the cost of that would be horrendous. But you know, but that's ideally where it would be located. But we've inherited the pub garden where it is, and there's not a great deal that I can that I can do about that. We are happy to compromise on the closing time, even closing at 10 o'clock at weekends in the rear garden if that helps. And those benches are no smoking, and we can monitor and make sure that's the case. And there shouldn't be. I mean, the wind direction will obviously depend, and I can't control that. But over the weekend, you know, I'm not sure which wind direction we had, but we can make those benches non-smoking. So that should alleviate a couple of the problems. We're not alluded to the fact of trying to make profit. Obviously, we want to make the business profitable. We're not a charity at the end of the day, and you know, the garden is part of that. But we actually like the pub to look nice, if that makes sense. It's not, that may be hard to sort of understand, but we take a lot of pride in what we do and the improvements that we've made. We could have come along and not spent any money and just put some tables in the rear garden and left everything as it was. But we want people that are sat out here, particularly if we're trying to attract the type of clientele that we are. This is mainly used as an eating area. You know, it's not somewhere that people sit down and come and drink. That's not really what we're trying to promote. Yes, that happens, of course it does, but the majority of people out here are looking for food, and that's really what we're about. That's kind of the market that we're trying to establish ourselves within.
Okay, thank you. I think we're sort of coming to the situation of nearly summing up now. Councillor Jones, you are muted.
Yes, I don't think that either side can say anything else.
No, I'm just going to say, does anybody have any, and I will stress these to be questions for anybody before I go into summing up. I want to make sure that everybody feels as though they have had their say this morning before we go into sum up. So if I get complete silence, then I will take it there is no questions for anybody, but I just want to make sure that it's everything can
Chair,
be
I have a question for Mr. Dean.
Okay.
I just wanted to know that the licence, you've just said that you would compromise on 10 o'clock for the outside. How difficult would it be for you to make sure that everyone would leave the garden at a reasonable time after? So assuming that last drinks would be ordered at 10 o'clock, and then a bit like in the pub, you know, last orders and you have a drinking up time. Would you be able to manage a drinking up time in the garden?
What we would do is actually we would close the outside bar at 9:30. So we would say last orders from the outside bar at 9:30. So we would intend to have everyone back inside again, or located at the front of the property by 10 o'clock. So I mean, that's a total compromise. That isn't us saying closing at 10 o'clock and being woolly about what time people have to drink up, because actually, to be honest with you, it suits us. Yeah, we too like our evenings. I started work at 6 o'clock on Saturday morning and finished work at 9:30. So for me to be able to close the outside bar, because predominantly I think it would be me managing it, and be indoors and sat upstairs watching Match of the Day and the things I enjoy doing, would actually benefit me as well. So it would suit us, to be honest with you. And it starts to get a bit chilly by then, to be fair. The lights are purely here for more from a decorative point of view. And that's one point I wanted to make, actually. He asked the question about the number of lights. We haven't increased the number of lights. There were additional spotlights on a fence that has now been removed to open the garden up. And these spotlights were annoying because what would happen is people would sit in front of them and they'd move. So they'd almost flash in a funny sort of way. And you'd walk past them and they'd flash again. So what we've done is replace those spotlights with 4 lights that are permanent, that are higher up, so they don't flash, if you know what I mean, when people walk in front of them, or sit in front of them, because the spotlights were at sort of waist level when you're standing up. So we haven't added any additional lights. We have removed 5 spotlights and replaced them with 4 normal garden lights that you or I would buy to put in your own garden, so not industrial strength. And again, one note was beforehand here, there was a very tall floodlight, which is still in the garden actually, but we disconnected, and that was how the garden was lit. Now that is positioned at the south corner of their property. And if we'd have gone on and continued with that, which is very much how this seems to be going, to continue with how things were with 2 benches, to continue with for example, that lighting, that would have been horrendous for people in the garden, but also for them, I would have thought. And that's still visible. You can see the tower that stands on, and it stands about 5 miles higher than that, actually, probably 5 to 6 meters high. It's as high as next door's bungalow.
Okay.
So just that point, really.
Yeah. Do we? Does anybody else have any questions? And that is literally for anybody, for either Mr. Dean, Mr. Ball, councillors.
Yeah, I think the question from my side is certainly, if this area is now predominantly for eating, then what is the time of service for food up until? Because actually, obviously, first weekend, you're not going to be up and running. It's very difficult to judge as whether or not you were 90% food this weekend and 10% drinking. Actually, like, we're not peering over the fence every 10 minutes to go, oh, actually, it's 9 o'clock, and actually 100% of those people are drinkers. I think it's very easy to say that this is all based upon eating, but I think ultimately there's a bar on there. If it is going to be primarily food-based, then actually that may make it a little easier. But the ultimate thing here is this license itself grants the ability to serve alcohol. It doesn't stop them serving the food. So it's an additional service on top of that. And I think the difficulty for us here is understanding ultimately how, if the food has been cooked inside the pub and going out from the pub, then a drink can come from the pub as well. Why does it need a bar outside? And then why does it need the bar to actually have the oversight of the garden when it should be there already? Yeah, I think that's the big question. Is one of the biggest challenges with this is the license has been submitted for an alcohol license with no clear or defined plan. So this is it effectively is too open. So it gives a right, if this is granted, for them to actually fully stock that horse box bar. Okay, for example, you could technically go and do that in a month's time. There's going to be no agreement within this license to say you can have 1 pump. The bar itself, actually, the horse box hasn't even been used yet, so we don't actually know what the full impact of that is. Noise, packing it away at 10 o'clock at night. I'm sure could tell us that it's going to be definitely silence. You won't be able to hear a peep, but then it could be the most rattly thing in the whole world at 10 o'clock at night being packed up. And there is a lot of what's actually going to happen if this is granted. So we have a base right now of noise. We know what it is, and actually we deem it later at night or early evening going into later at night, it gets to the point it's unacceptable.
Yeah. And
then we're looking to possibly add further disruption onto that. Yes, ultimately, I think for us is if the license is granted and there is noise at that, then we're going to challenge that, and we're going to have to go for other formal channels of it.
Okay, and again, if should the license be granted, obviously anybody is obviously within their rights to come to us with proof, and obviously the license can be called in and it can be reviewed.
Yeah, and so just to be clear, we don't want to start a war. There, Andy. Yeah. We don't want a war. We want a good relationship. And as I said before, this isn't about us protecting our property, our family, and our right to enjoy here. And we want to have the working relationship out of this. So kind of whatever happens, jump to the other side of the street. We want to be able to have a conversation. We want to get bottles of beer. It's our voting station, for God's sake, next door. So it's where we look for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think this is clear on that one.
Can I answer that question then?
Mr. Dean, just to answer the question, what are your times for serving food? Are you sort of all day or?
At the moment, we only open Thursday through till Sunday, and we serve food on a Thursday from 12 o'clock until 2 o'clock is the last food order.
Yeah.
And we serve food from 6 until 8 o'clock, 8 o'clock being the last food order. On Saturday and Sunday, we serve food from 12 until 7 o'clock being the last food order. Now that's born again out of what the restrictions that are in place at the moment, because normally we would be serving food 12 till 3. Well, we close the pub at 3, so again 12 till 2. On a weekday. We don't open Monday and Tuesday. That's through choice to give ourselves a day off, and we do that Wednesday through until Friday, and then in the evenings we serve food from 6 until 9 o'clock is the last food order. Predominantly what tends to happen is that we haven't really decided on how we're going to run things this year, because it's very much every time we make a decision, the government changes the direction that they're going in, and we have to rethink things. But the menu that we offer is very, very small at the moment. It's only main courses. We don't have starters or desserts on there. There are 8 items. We have an in-betweeners menu for children sort of between the ages of 10 to 16, and then we have a children's menu for under 10. So you can see the type of market that we're trying to go after. And they've actually got more choice on there than the adults have got on.
They always do.
Well, yeah, they do, and the food looks better. But can I just clarify the horse box situation? The horse box at the moment, I'm quite happy to open it and show you on the camera if I can. Has not been kitted out with anything at the moment. It's been white lined with plastic sort of material that you would see in a kitchen. There are plug sockets in there. There have been no benches or anything like that, because we weren't going to spend the money on that for the license to then not come through. To fully stock it is impossible. It's, if you stand in there, if you have a fridge behind you, you cannot then have anything in front of you. There isn't the space to do so. And I'll be totally honest, when we first submitted this first application, we felt that we had to do it to operate the bar outside. We felt that it was the right thing to do, to be above board and to clearly show what our intentions are. The day after we submitted, I said to my wife, I said, I regret doing it, because I already feel stressed out about the whole process, and we didn't need to do it to achieve what we wanted to achieve. What we aim to do with this horse box is to use it more on occasions than to be using it on a regular basis, because the representative is correct. It is impossible for us to stock everything in that horse box that somebody might need. And I know that someone's going to order a pint of beer for themselves and then a gin and tonic for their wife, and I'm going to have to run inside and get it. So actually, if the license isn't granted, we could probably do what we want to do under temporary event notices. Yeah. The difficulty with that is you cannot predict the English weather, and this is why I proceeded with the application. Temporary event notices aren't expensive as such, but they are when you look at how much you have to sell to cover the cost of the temporary event notice. Being, I think it's about £25, isn't it? But to do that, you have to then sell £75 worth of beer. And if it chucks it down with rain all weekend, after you've put your temporary event notice in 7 days prior, your whole event is scuppered and you've wasted your temporary event notice, of which are limited. Yeah. So the idea is not to have that it's not going to be open every day. And I accept what he is saying, that we could open it every day. I haven't got the staff to do that. I've no intention of doing that. We want to have cocktails. We want to have tapas on the terrace. And these things will be events that will take place. But we need the flexibility with the English weather to be able to run them from that outside bar. So what we would do is we would go in and stock the bar up with cocktails, for example, so that if we've got cocktails on the terrace, that's what we'll be serving that day. And then that evening, 9:30, when we call last orders, the person out there can pick everything up, of which there won't be much, because the cocktails these days are all pre-made, and carry everything that you've got indoors, because that's a requirement of the license, to have the alcohol out of that to protect against crime. If we could keep it in there until the following morning, that would be a help, but that might just encourage crime. So that half an hour gives us time to do that. The events that we're planning on having, we're not planning on running that bar on a day in, day out basis. I haven't got the staff or the financial being to be able to pay someone to stand there to serve the odd drink. And perhaps I didn't make that clear on the application, but I took advice on that and didn't complete the paperwork myself, which if I had have done, perhaps I would have made that a bit clearer. And as for working at going forward, got no extra grind. I like our neighbours. They're nice people, genuinely. after this is finished, I'd like to go around and say hello and hope that all is well. And we want to work closely with them because we ourselves don't want any hassle. I struggle to sleep at night if people are worrying about stuff. I don't like any problems or issues with the pub. We run a mile from it if we even see it happening. I'm even too cautious when I'm booking people in. And my wife joked with me the other day because I had what sounded like a young chap on the phone. And I said to him, I said, are you all good behaviours? And she was like, you can't be like their dad every time they're phoning to book up. But this is what it makes you feel like when you're running this kind of business in this type of environment. But so we are keen to work with them.
Yeah, I think what we'll do is, because I think we're coming away from questions more, I think I will go into summing up. I think if we can get
just one very quick question, because I think it's probably an important one for me.
Okay, as long as it's a question.
Yeah, it's definitely a question. It's kind of quite broad, but what with this license, if it was granted, what is there to start? Obviously, if you granted it in Forvit currently, there, I presume, is nothing to stop Andy here, them putting a porter cabin style thing, and then because that's under license. Is there anything to stop that, or is the license open, or is it defined, etc.?
What I can say, Mr. Ball, is I will pass this over to Aileen, and Aileen will be able to answer your concerns for you. Thanks, Aileen.
Thank you, Chair. The actual plan is part of the licence. It's what we call Annex 4. Therefore, you can't actually put any more fixed, permanent things on there without actually having another variation and changing the plan. So no, you wouldn't be able to put another bar in the car park.
Great, thank you very much.
Does that answer your question?
It does indeed, yes.
Good, thank you.
I couldn't afford to do it anyway.
Yeah. Are there any more questions? If there's no more questions, I am going to give all parties a chance to sum up now, and I am going to do this backwards because we always do. So I will start with Mr. Ball. Mr. Ball, do you want to sum up? Anything else to add? And this is basically going to be a statement from yourself. Obviously, no questions or anything. This is just maybe your last chance to put anything to us.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope I've made it clear the impact of having a pub garden next to our house has, and the changes that have been made to it. I think for me, the main thing is that if there is a granting of a license, we would ask for you to think carefully around the parameters of that. And certainly with the comments that we have made during this meeting. I think for us, this is all predominantly around risk and associated risk of any changes. Obviously, we have seen that evolve over time. When you purchase a house next to a pub garden, you do your due diligence. We did that. I am local to here. I knew for a number of years. So we purchased the house, and then this is fine. And obviously, it has changed over time, and they're within their rights to have changed over time. We are also within our rights to challenge that over time. So yeah, as I said, look, there's nothing here personal in this. We are looking to protect ourselves. This has, and as Andy has made the point, this is a great deal of stress. This is our home. This is where we live. We have lived here now for some time. We have a family here now. We want to enjoy it. Okay, we want to be able to sit outside and not be stressing about this. You don't want to sit on your sofa every single night, and when you hear somebody above the noise of your TV go, "Oh, that again." We don't want that. Okay, so I think anything that we can do to reduce noise, times, anything is great. And I think we've obviously noted around the licensing. Now, let's be clear, we haven't, and actually due to circumstances over the last couple of weeks, haven't had the opportunity to fully look at this, okay? So the licensing area we see right now as an overreach, okay? So it doesn't need to be as far as it does. And actually, we haven't had the ability to go and check and see what impact that may have on mortgaging the property, etc. So we wouldn't want to go to next year when we have to remortgage and find out that because there is a licensed premises right up to our border, that affects it. We wouldn't want to get to that stage selling our house affected. So effectively, I think we're trying to be fair here. Ultimately, we're trying to reduce the impact on us as a property. There are challenges. If it is used as defined, it's kind of almost sounds different, but we are very much basing this on worst case scenario. So in 2 to 3 months' time, when effectively, and it's not to say Andy's decided will go back on his word, but opens that up as a fully fledged bar and serves from it everything, it doesn't do any food, that we don't have to end up back here again.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for your comments today. And thank you ever so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time. Thank you very much. We have no responsible authority, so then can I then now go to Mr. Dean. Mr. Dean, this is your chance to sum up, please.
Very similar to what Mr. Ball said, actually. This is our home. It's our family home. Running a business, particularly a pub in these challenging times, is extremely stressful. So we're singing off the same hymn sheet, I think, is the phrase that people say. We live on site. The horse box cannot function as a fully fledged bar. We are happy to amend the times. We are happy to call last orders in the garden at 9:30 every day of the week, including weekends. We're happy to make the tables on all of the grass area actually non-smoking. So that would reduce hugely any smoke issues, unless the wind was predominantly strong from the southwest. But that, as I said, I can't change, and that is probably a good 9 meters, perhaps 10 meters from his fence. So that would mean that nobody would be smoking within that vicinity. We would put sign up saying that you are now entering a no smoking area, so that reduces that. The one thing, as I said before, it's impossible to reduce the hubbub of a busy pub garden. And I would say that if he has any issues, particularly on any days in the future, that he speaks to me direct and gives me the opportunity to resolve these issues with the people concerned. I'm more than happy to do that. As I say, the outside bar was bought out of the pandemic, but it really is there to provide more a function rather than a continual bar on a day-to-day basis, because it just isn't possible to have that set up with the staffing. I've got no intention of making the pub drinks only. You know, our license currently is till 2 a.m. We've never gone past midnight other than New Year's Eve. We close and call last. We want to be done by at least 11 o'clock inside because we have a 13-year-old daughter. And we like to keep noise reduced to a minimum because her bedroom actually is closer to the garden than their daughter's bedroom from where I'm sat at the moment. So we're all doing the same thing, and we have the same issues that he has. But you know, what I can't change, as I've said before, is the hubbub of a busy pub garden, and I can't afford to not have a busy pub garden and to not have a pub garden, because that is what this pub has become very much known for. So I ask if you can grant the license, and I will happily continue to work with our next door neighbour.
Thank you for that. I appreciate your time today, and thanks for joining us. I will now go to our licensing team leader, Aileen.
Thank you, Chair. I've got absolutely nothing to say.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I will now just go to our legal advisor just to clarify that all relevant points have been addressed. Lara?
Yes, Councillor Parker, I think you've covered everything.
Thank you very much. So In that case, the public part of the meeting will now conclude. The subcommittee will consider its decision in private with the Democratic Service Officer in remote attendance, and our legal advisor will be called upon should we need any legal guidance from her. The decision of the licensing subcommittee will be sent out to all parties once we've made our decision, and you will get a written the written decision will come out to you within 5 working days. And on response to what our decision is, you do have the rights to appeal to Weymouth Magistrates Court, and that's within 21 days of getting the written decision. So can I please have a vote from councillors to now go into a closed session?
Agree.
Agreed.
Okay, with that in mind, I will now end this meeting, and I would just like to thank everybody for their attendance today. It's appreciated, and obviously you will get our decision as soon as possible. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone, for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.